The summer the foreigners came, the sky opened up early and poured light on the fields like someone had tipped a bucket of gold. I was 12 and thin as a dry reed, all stick legs and elbows, and I swear I could hear the sun crackle on the dust of the road and see the heat shimmy above the roof. By noon it smelled like hot straw and diesel, because the KTEL bus from Thessaloniki had just wheezed its way into our square, coughing smoke and strangers, and out they climbed with their rucksacks and funny hats and boxes that looked like medical kits or little magic chests. They blinked in the brightness, and I watched from the shade of the plane tree with a piece of cowlery in my hand, the sesame seeds popping against my tongue. I didn't know them yet. It was only later I learned the names and the way their voices rolled like marbles when they spoke in French, that soft feeling like bread dough pressed with warm fingers. You could tell right away they weren't tourists. They didn't stare at the church dome of St. Demetrius or at the donkey carts, though my friend Demo said foreign people love to look at donkeys like they are mythical creatures. These had papers and notebooks, and one of them squinted up at the sky not like he was admiring it but like he was gauging it, and then he squinted down at the road and at the ditches and at the field beyond the fig trees, as if the ground was speaking to him. One of the women put a hand to her headscarf to keep it from flying off in the bus's breath, and she held her glasses with the same hand, a very careful person. Later, when she took her scarf off in the shade, her hair was pinned tidy, the color of wheat straw. Papo said, "Look how French people blink like owls in the daytime." He said this in his soft old voice that always had dust in it, like he had swallowed the whole road. He smoked his cigarette down to the nub and then made that clucking noise he does when he's pleased with his own joke. My mother, who doesn't think jokes are for the first half of the day, told him to hush and nudged me with her elbow. "Go on, Nikos," she said. "Stand up straight. You'll be polite to them. If they bother the field, we will be polite while we tell them not to." As if I could make my elbows and knees sit like soldiers just because she said so. Too many angles, that was my trouble. But I stood, and I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, and I stared openly the way my mother warned me not to. They were interesting. I wanted to see what they had in their boxes and what they saw in the dry ditch that was only a ditch to us, the place where we chased lizards and found a lost goat once that had belonged to old Kyria Sophia, who always gave us figs for bringing back any runaway animal, even chickens, and I used to sneak the figs home and not say where I got them so my mother would not refuse the gift in case she thought we were pestering. Before you come to conclusions about me, you should know I never stole any figs, she gave them freely. Maybe I didn't say right away how they got to my mouth, but figs should be eaten fast, or the wasps do it for you. The foreigners had cut open the bus from the city as if it were a pomegranate, and now they spilled out little red seeds of their own language into our square, and the bus coughed again and trembled and then trundled away. My father was watching from the doorway of our house, which is carved straight into the street like all the houses on our row, only a step up from the dust and then right into the cool shadow of our kitchen. He makes tables when people have money and chairs when they have less money, and he repairs things when they have no money at all, and sometimes he goes to the city to work in the port. He has a scar on his forehead in the shape of a question mark, and I always think it's funny, because when he looks at you with his head tilted, it looks like the question is for you. He rubbed his scar now and said, "If they are here to buy wood, fine. If they are here to dig, they will need permission." He always talks like that, two choices, one reasonable and one a little bit difficult, and he says them like someone had just put those choices into his hands and asked him to balance them. "I think they're here to dig," I said, because I had a clear sense that the ditch had finally become important to the world, and I liked everything that made our place important to the world. A lot of people had left for Germany or Canada or even Australia, the most faraway place in my mind, because on the globe at school it sits under our feet, and I had promised myself I would never leave. Well, I promised now, but you can't be sure what 12-year-olds promise themselves will last. The point is, right then, all I wanted was to make our ditches and gullies and the bend of the Axios River be the center of something. The man who squinted at the ground had a gray beard that he kept tugging as if to remind himself what direction his chin was in. He wore a short-sleeved shirt and a hat with a brim that had snapped where it shouldn't be snapped, so one side tilted up in a jaunty way. He had a camera strapped to him like a baby carrier, and every now and then he would lift it and click, click, click. The careful woman with the scarf wiped her forehead with a folded handkerchief, the proper kind with little lace on the edges like my mother keeps for weddings. Another man, tall and lanky with sunburned ears, had a wooden case with brass corners, and he carried it like it was fragile, though I found out later there was a hammer inside. Kalamira, the bearded man said, squinting at us with too much confidence in the vowel. It slid like hot olive oil around his tongue. Kalimira. I can it. Kala, my mother said, softening. It's hard not to soften when someone tries. She stepped forward and pressed her palms together in that way she has, like she is clapping without sound. You are from France, the careful woman said, very clear, the way you say words to a baby. She looked at me. You speak English. At school, I said, only a little proud. My English was rabbits out of the hedges appearing and then running into new hedges. You dig. We are anthropologists, the bearded man said, and then corrected himself. Paleontologists. We study old bones. Fossils. He tapped his camera. We have permit from Thessaloniki University. He said Thessaloniki the way you might say a hard candy that sticks in your teeth. We look in the ravine. He pointed. Rema, I said. Ravine is Rema. Then I couldn't help it. What bones? It slipped out, the question I always had to swallow in front of my teachers, because if you ask too much, they think you are showing off, and I wasn't. I just needed to know. Demos once said my questions ran after each other like goats on a bridge, and sometimes one fell off, bleeding. The careful woman looked at the bearded man, and they exchanged a small smile. We look for many animals, she said, counting on her fingers. Giraffe cousins. Rhino cousins. Antelope. And, maybe, primate. She looked at me to see if I had the word. I didn't, but my face must have shown that I thought primate sounded like a kind of knife or maybe a Greek cake, because she added quickly, monkey. Ape. Pithecos, I said. Would you find them here? My voice did that hopeful thing that is almost a color in the air, all glittering. I couldn't help it. In our Rema. If the Rema is old, the bearded man said, if it cuts, and it shows the bones in the sides like a cake, yes. The bones can be there for millions of years, and the ravine opens them. Millions rattled in me. I wanted to repeat the number to everyone. It felt like I'd learned to lift something heavy. I can show you, I blurted. We know where the ravine is deepest. After rain, there is a small fall. We put stones to make a pool. The goats like to drink there. That would be kind, he said. He said it slowly so the words would untangle for me. What is your name? Nikos, I said, and I didn't even look back to see if my mother was going to let me talk like this to foreigners. My knees already knew they had to run ahead. I am Laron, he said, pointing to his chest, and then to the careful woman. "This is Isabel. And Costas." He turned to the tall one with the ears. "Greek," he said helpfully. "Costas from the university," my father called from the doorway, surprising me, because he hates to call anything across the street. He says it makes you look like you're throwing your words. But he came down into the bright and squinted up into it too. "I thought you were finished with the other ravine. Now you bother ours." "Yes," Costas called back, grinning. Not offended, not even pretending. "But now we bother it with better permits." My father pretended to check the edge of the table he had been sanding, a finished edge that didn't need checking, and then he finished coming down the steps anyway. He wiped sawdust from his arm in that slow way of his, like he was thinking with his hands. He offered them to shake. "Stavros," he said to Laurent and to Isabel, nodding, "and this is Eleni. We are not animals in a zoo. We have names." "Of course," Isabel said quickly, her cheeks flushing under the glasses. "We are grateful to be here." "If you are grateful, you can pay for water," my mother said, which sounds rude until you realize that in summer, water is work. "And oil. And bread if you plan to eat like people should, not like birds. You will need a boy to carry things." She put her hand on my head. "This one has legs like motorcycle spokes. He can carry more than he should. He knows how not to break things. And if you pay him, he will keep secrets for you. If you do not pay him," she looked at me, and her eyebrow did a thing that had stopped me from eating olives before dinner my whole life, "he will keep secrets for me." It was done. Just like that. It's a mistake to think meetings are long, serious things where the grown ups bring paper to agree on. Sometimes they fit into the space of 2 jokes and a handshake. I showed them the ravine at the edge of the wheat where the ground fell away into a scar of sand and pebbles and clay. We called it Ouranopithecus rema because when you lay on your back on the hard flat rock by the pool and looked up, you could see only sky, like the ravine swallowed the earth and spit you up into the blue. Also because if you fell wrong, you'd go to Ouranopithecus, which is where we imagine the sky god leans down to see how his reflection looks in the river. There were places where the layers were clearly stripes: orange sand, gray clay, pale gravel, and places where the rains had tricked the edges into lumps and caves, and Demos and I had sat in those caves sometimes, pretending we were bandits or fishermen, depending on what stories we had heard that week. Laurent squatted and stared at the wall of it like he could see through it to the bottom of the earth. He touched the sand with his fingertips like he was testing a melon, and then, very carefully, he pressed on the pebbles in the middle layer, the gray one, the one that always slid out onto our legs when we climbed. He looked back at Isabel, and she raised her eyebrows, and something passed between them. Costas knelt on both knees and put his ear close to the side of the ravine like it would sing for him. He looked up at me with his big ears and grinned. "Yes," he said softly, in Greek now. "Yes, I think our Ouranopithecus might send us a gift." He didn't say it like a man who wants to grab. He said it like someone waking up and finding light on the pillow next to them. That evening in our kitchen, my mother sliced tomatoes and cucumbers and onions and laid them in a shallow dish, and she sprinkled oregano and drizzled oil so golden it might have been melted coins. She placed fat olives, the kind from my uncle's trees near Katerini, and feta, and she tore bread from the round loaf in hunks just the size your hand expects. My father poured retsina into glasses, but not too much, because he suspiciously watches wine near foreigners. He says some people drink to make their tongues clever, and that's when they promise things with big words, but the morning sun is always sober. Isabel and Laurent sat at our table, and I sat at the corner, allowed to listen. Costas came and leaned in the doorway with a cigarette but did not bring the smoke inside, because my mother would have chased him out with a broom otherwise. They spoke half in English because I had asked to practice and half in Greek because my parents would listen, and sometimes they spilled French between them when they needed it. I liked the feeling of the three languages braided together like the old fish nets when we used to go to the sea more, and Papo would set the net carefully and teach me how to untangle seaweed from it without tearing the thin cords. "We'll start with mapping," Laurent said. His hands were brown and had pale lines where the skin had been folded into fists and the sun couldn't reach. We lay a grid. We set stakes. We clean the profile of the ravine. We work slow. We don't take a big bite and choke. He wiggled his fingers as if he was telling the dough to rise. It's patience. "What do you hope to find?" my father asked. His voice was interested and careful. Sometimes he can get excited about other people's projects if there are straight lines and measuring involved. "What can you tell from what you find?" "Teeth," Isabel said, and smiled as if teeth were a lovely surprise. "If we find teeth, it is like finding pages of a book that have numbers on them. They tell you more than a toe or a bit of rib. You can tell what the animal ate, often what animal it was, if the enamel is thick or thin, how the cusps are arranged." She pushed her glasses up. "For primates, apes' teeth tell a lot. There have been important primate fossils from here, from the valley, your valley," she corrected herself, "in the past years. There is still more." But her face changed slightly, the way a sky changes when the clouds pull apart and show you thinner blue. "We must be careful." "Careful," my mother said. "So you don't break something." "That, too." Isabel smiled. "But careful how we speak. The newspapers like to say big things. Sometimes they say, 'This is our grandmother' or 'This is our grandfather' when we find a bone. It sounds warm, but it is not how the bones speak. The bones do not say a straight line. They say a tree with many branches. We don't know if our branch comes from a branch here or there. It is difficult." She sighed. "And beautiful. There were people, well, not people like us, but kind of in these hills," I said, hardly believing my own words. You must understand, it made my skin tingle to think of someone like me, even a little like me, walking where I ran, stepping where my toes had pressed a story into the dust. "Ape," Laurent said. "Cousin of the family that eventually, much, much later, has us. Maybe around here, maybe not. But this ape, we call him Ouranopithecus. Do you know the words? Ouranos, sky. Pithecos, ape. The sky ape. Ouranopithecus, I repeated, and the word hung in the kitchen like a small bell, softer than I expected. The syllables tasted good. "Why sky?" "First, because of the sound of your language, and it is a nice word," Laurent said, shrugging. "And perhaps because when he was named, they looked up and laughed." He shook his head slightly at that. "There are different reasons, some more official. But Ouranos is a strong name. And we found him in Macedonia. In your valley. It is important for science to see apes in Europe at that time, late Miocene. It shows movements of animals when the world's climate was changing, the forests opening in places." He took a bite of bread. "It tells us something about where the lines cross." "You think he is our grandfather," my mother said. Splitting truth from superstition is a sport for her. I've seen her watch a neighbor talk about the evil eye with the same look she watches the price of tomatoes at market. "The monkey is our grandfather." "Ape," Costas corrected. He had slipped inside to steal a tomato wedge, and he popped it in his mouth now and chewed happily. Not a monkey. Monkeys have tails. Apes don't. And not grandfather. You will make the journalist at Thessaloniki's coffee house very happy if you say that. Okay, not grandfather, my mother said, rolling her eyes. What is he then? Maybe cousin of a branch near the one that leads to us. Isabel folded her hands. But we do not know where the branch grows from. We must look from many places. There are apes in Europe then, apes in Africa. The story is complicated. Some years it looks like it comes one way, other years another. There are gaps. That is why every new find is important. It does not change everything. She stopped and looked at me because I had leaned so far forward my elbow was in the salad. But it adds a piece we didn't have. I pulled my elbow back and carefully licked the perfect mix of salty and sour from my skin when my mother wasn't looking. What did he look like? We use names like he or she, Laurent said gently, but we talk about a species, not one animal. Strong jaws, maybe eating hard or abrasive foods, sometimes thick enamel to protect the teeth. Robust face by some reconstructions. But we must not make a painting that is too confident. We have to hold the brush lightly. Lightly, my father repeated, like he was tasting the word. He nodded at me. Are you listening to this? Nothing is a line. Everything is a tree. I'm listening, I said, and the tree in my head grew branches. It was a plane tree, of course, because that's our biggest shade, and I imagined the branches bending toward some that came from the south and some from the north, and the wind making the leaves talk to each other, and the trunk so thick that it would take 6 boys with their arms linked to embrace it. I imagined Ouranopithecus sitting on one bending branch, not too far from where our branch would sprout someday, his hands like mine, only bigger, paws at the edges of his mouth like maybe he thought before he ate. I could see him. He seemed to look back at me without fear. The next morning I woke up before the light had sorted itself. The east was still smudged like a thumb had rubbed it. Roosters think they can boss the sun, so they were yelling as if their throats were little horns. Our kitchen had that night chill in it that holds onto stone long after the day gives up, so I took my bread to the courtyard and ate it there, hunched on the step, warm crumbs in my lap, while my mother boiled water in our battered kettle for coffee. The steam rose like a ghost, and it smelled like grown-up life and secrets and tiredness and bravery. I watched it curl up into the early light and tried to memorize all the parts of morning so I could tell them to someone else someday when I was old. You'll need to wear your sandals with the thicker straps, my mother said. She had a way of walking and talking without bending, like everything just found its proper place around her. She poured thick coffee into the little briquet, the small pot with the long handle, and she stirred with the kind of care that keeps everything just below angry but just above lazy, so it made a sweetness in the air, even if the coffee itself is bitter. And a hat. I have my cap, I said, showing it to her, a cap with a faded PAOK logo that Demos and I had found under the stadium stands one day when we had gone to the city with my uncle, who wanted better tiles for his terrace than anything in our village. I am not stupid. I didn't say that, she said, with only a shadow of an eyebrow. But I will also tell you that once again, and 2 more times, because you pretend to forget when it suits your feet. She handed me a tin cup of water and a little bag of bread and olives, and she pushed a wedge of watermelon into my hands at the last second, as if she had smuggled it past herself. By the time I reached the ravine, the cicadas were beginning their day's song, which is like tiny rattles rubbed fast, and the wheat had started to smell like the inside of a warm oven. Isabel was already there with Costas, laying out tape measures and pounding little wooden stakes into the ground with a small hammer that had a leathered handle. She looked up at me and smiled, a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes like paper. "Good," she said. "Work starts early." Laurent came with the last of the shade still wrapped around his shoulders and then shook it off as the sun climbed. They made a square with string across the face of the ravine, an orange string that made the wall look like a paper slice in a mathematics book at school. Kostas called out numbers in Greek and then in English, and he wrote them in a notebook with a pencil that he kept sharpening with his teeth when it broke. "I am measuring it alive," he said to me when I watched too closely. Alive means hands moving. Paper will not catch everything. They started by brushing the surface of the profile with wide, soft paint brushes to take away the loose dust. Every now and then they stopped moving and called me over to point at something I would have ignored, a small pebble that sat differently in the sand, a dark smear that could be organic matter, a shard that was not as shiny as rock and not as rough. I learned to look for the color that is not color, the brown that has a richness in it like old wood, and the curve that is not a random curve but a curve that is shaped by growing and doing. We found nothing for a while except for the things you find when you're not looking for anything at all, a shiny green beetle, a feather half buried so it looks like it's diving into the earth instead of the sky, a piece of blue tile that must have fallen out of someone's truck on the upper road and been washed down, a rusted lighter with the label of a brand my father hates because he says their red paint chips too easily, and 2 cigarette butts that Kostas guiltily picked up and stuck in his pocket so Isabel wouldn't make a speech. It was later, when the sun had slapped us red and the cicadas were loud enough to ride on, that Laurent's brush slowed. He knelt closer. He blew softly. The fine dust rose and turned to light and dove right back into the wall. "Is it?" Isabel said. The hope in her voice made the world around us hold its breath. The ravine, too, seemed to listen, as if all the layers were waiting for what we would say about them. "I think so," Laurent murmured, half to the wall, half to himself. "Edge of enamel. Right here." He pulled a small dental pick out of his leather case, and I watched the tip of it as if my eyes could make it sharper. He tickled a bit of clay away, then licked his finger and swiped the spot clean and blew again. He smiled, but very softly, like he was afraid of scaring a bird away. "Tooth," he said. My heart, which is always fast, forgot how to beat. It just hung there. Kostas placed his hand on my shoulder so I wouldn't crowd. "We will make a jacket," he murmured. "We will mark it properly. We will go slow." It was small, the visible edge, like a fingernail. The color was creamy with a hint of orange, and the shine was unmistakable once you saw it, like a fingernail too, but somehow calmer, older. Isabel made a tiny sound and then looked up at the sky, not quite praying, but something close. Laurent tapped the spot with the end of his brush like a blessing. They withdrew together, sitting back on their heels. "Okay," Isabel said, the way my mother says okay before she starts kneading bread, like everything is in its place now and the hands can do what they are meant to do. "We clean around. We leave a pedestal. We make a field jacket with plaster. We take photographs, measurements, notes. No hero moves?" She eyed me just long enough to know I got that I was not to kick my enthusiasm into the wall. Laurent took out a camera and clicked from different angles, then a little booklet, and he drew a rectangle and scribbled numbers for the exact place of the tooth. He drew the layers, too, shading differently, and when he stopped to blow on the pencil tip to cool it, this is what he said: "I suspect it's habit." He gave me the book to hold, and I felt like the thin paper might burn with the importance of what it was about to hold. Costas brought the plaster, powdered gypsum in a sack, a basin to mix it, strips of cloth torn from old sheets, and a bottle of glue that has a name that sounded like a Greek island to me. He made a little wall of rocks and packed clay to keep the wet plaster from oozing away. Isabel cut bandages into shorter strips and held them like a nurse. It was an operating theater, dirty and perfect. I watched the plaster bloom from powder to thick milk, and then to a creamy paste, and when Costas dipped the strips, they changed character just like that, from stiff to flexible, and he laid them over the little mound that held the tooth like tucking a baby. "It is an honor," he said to me, because I was leaning in, my breath shallow. "You will see many bones, if you stay near us, but the first will always feel like this." "What animal?" I whispered, though I knew they would not claim yet. Even now I could taste the new caution in my mouth. "Ape? Maybe." "Teeth first," Isabel said. "Identification later. We will know more when we see the shape. But this has a feel." I didn't want to say the word because I was afraid I'd chase something away, but my head said it for me anyway, Ouranopithecus. The sky ape. All afternoon we worked around the tooth, which was itself part of a small cluster, little pebbles of bone here and there, maybe bits that had spalled off. From a bit of farther along the wall, in the same layer, came a piece of antelope horn core, twisted, not polished yet by our hands. Costas whistled when he found it and held it up to the light as if a sunlit layer could tell you more. He jotted. Laurent wrote so much that his hand cramped, and he shook it and laughed. Isabel drank water and frowned at the air and once used her scarf to tie my hair back, even though it wasn't that long, because she said my forehead was making shadows, and I had to go ask my mother later whether my forehead had forgotten to behave. When she returned from bringing a jug of cold water, my mother sat for a moment on a stone and lowered her head, not in sadness, but in a way like she was letting the sky drip into her. Then she looked up at the ridge where the wheat met the road and where the old poplar was, and I knew she was measuring it not in height but in years, thinking of how it had seen things long before she did. "Don't give the tooth your grief," she said softly, "not to me, not to anyone in particular. Give it your patience." And that's how it was, from then on, for many days, patience and dust and small discoveries that you hold in your hand like a finch. I learned the names of the tools, trowel, brush, pick, all. I learned the names of the small bones, phalanx, metapodial, calcaneus. I learned that a tooth can not only be a tooth